Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever wonder if you can picture things in your mind or if some people just can't? This study dives deep into that very question and how it might relate to trauma and stress. This research is asking a really interesting question. Does your ability to create mental images in your head actually play a role in how severely you experience PTSD, that is post-traumatic stress disorder? You might think that if you can strongly imagine something, especially something traumatic, it would make the bad feelings worse. And for a long time, that is what many theories suggested. One cool new idea is called the Generative Adversarial Network Model. Now that sounds super complicated, but think of it like this. Your brain has different systems sending signals. One system tries to predict what is happening, and another system acts like a reality checker, trying to decide if what the first system is predicting is actually real. This model suggests that in PTSD, this reality checker might be a bit broken. And a strong predictor system, someone who can really vividly imagine things, might end up experiencing those imagined events as if they were real, leading to really intense intrusive memories, those unwanted flashbacks. The model basically predicts that if you can't imagine things well, you should be protected from these really intense, intrusive experiences, and maybe even from PTSD itself. So, with that in mind, the researchers wanted to test this idea. They looked at a specific group of people called those with aphantasia. Now, aphantasia is a condition where someone has very little or no ability to create visual images in their mind's eye. It is like not being able to see with your mind. It affects about 1 to 4% of people. And the big question was, are these individuals with aphantasia, who can't vividly imagine things, actually protected from PTSD, especially from those awful intrusive memories? To find out, they gathered a group of 312 US military veterans. They had these veterans fill out 2 main questionnaires. The first was the Vividness of Visual Imagery Questionnaire, or VVIQ for short. This is basically a test to see how clearly you can imagine things. It asks you to visualize different scenes and rate how vivid those mental pictures are. The second questionnaire was the PTSD checklist for DSM-5, or PCL-5. This is a standard way to measure the severity of PTSD symptoms, looking at things like intrusions, avoidance, negative thoughts, and arousal. They wanted to see if there was a link between how well people could imagine things on the VVIQ and how high their PTSD scores were on the PCL-5. Now, here's where it gets really interesting and actually challenges that initial idea. The researchers found that lower scores on the VVIQ, meaning less vivid mental imagery, were actually associated with greater PTSD severity. Yes, you heard that right. It seems like the opposite of what the generative adversarial model predicted. This negative relationship where one goes down and the other goes up was seen across all the different PTSD symptom clusters. The strongest connection was with negative cognition and mood, then arousal, then intrusions and avoidance. And what about those with aphantasia? The study identified 8 veterans who had very low VVIQ scores, fitting the criteria for aphantasia. But here is the kicker: 5 of those 8 veterans actually had clinically significant PTSD. Some even reported high levels of intrusive symptoms. This means that having aphantasia, or not being able to visualize well, did not protect them from developing PTSD or experiencing those disturbing intrusions. It really suggests that aphantasia doesn't act as a shield against trauma. So what does this all mean? The initial prediction from the generative adversarial model that vivid imagery amplifies PTSD symptoms, especially intrusive flashbacks, didn't hold up. Instead, the findings lean towards the idea that vivid visual imagery might actually be a protective factor, or at least associated with better processing of traumatic experiences. The study authors suggest that being able to deliberately create mental images, like using voluntary visual imagery, could be a tool for processing trauma. It might help reconstruct memories, regulate emotions, and integrate traumatic experiences into a more coherent narrative. When you can't do that, when your imagery is very low, it could make it harder to process trauma effectively, potentially leading to more severe symptoms. The fact that the strongest link was with the negative cognition and mood cluster is particularly important. This cluster includes things like remembering the event poorly, having really negative beliefs about yourself and the world, feeling detached from others, and lacking positive emotions. If you can't easily visualize things, it might be harder to reframe or read. Experience those negative thoughts and feelings in a different way. Imagine trying to build a positive outlook when you can't visualize yourself in a better situation or reimagine a past event with a different outcome. The study suggests that visual imagery might help with this kind of cognitive flexibility and emotional regulation. Interestingly, there were some nuanced findings. For example, female veterans were more likely to have PTSD symptoms than male veterans, but their imagery vividness scores were similar. However, when they looked at specific types of trauma, like military sexual trauma in women versus combat trauma in men, they saw differences. Vivid imagery was strongly linked to less severe PTSD in men with combat trauma, but showed no correlation in women with military sexual trauma. This hints that the type of trauma might interact with visual imagery in complex ways. Perhaps for combat trauma, visual imagery can help to spatially and temporally contextualize the event, making it feel less immediate and overwhelming. For other types of trauma, the impact of imagery might be different. So, for those with aphantasia, the takeaway isn't that they are immune to PTSD. They can still experience trauma through other sensory channels like emotions, bodily sensations, and even auditory or tactile intrusion. The lack of visual imagery just means that one specific pathway for experiencing trauma might be less pronounced, but it doesn't prevent the overall development and severity of the disorder. This has big implications for therapies. If someone can't visualize, therapies that heavily rely on imagery exposure or rescripting might not be as effective, and could even be frustrating. Alternative approaches that focus more on cognitive restructuring without visual components might be more beneficial. Another interesting detail from the study was the high number of veterans who reported extremely vivid imagery, a condition called hyperphantasia. This was much higher than in the general population. The researchers suggest this could be due to the nature of military service, which often requires strong visual and spatial skills. They even tested if using visual anchors like pictures of an apple made a difference in rating vividness, and it seemed to strengthen the observed negative correlation between imagery vividness and PTSD. This research points to some really important clinical implications. It suggests that while vivid imagery might be a risk factor for some aspects of PTSD, like those overwhelming flashbacks, it can also be a powerful tool for coping and recovery. For people with low imagery, therapy might need to be tailored. Therapies that don't rely on visualizing traumatic events might be a better fit. Conversely, for those with vivid imagery, techniques like imagery rescripting, where you guide the visualization to reframe traumatic memories, could be particularly helpful. It's about matching the treatment to the individual's strengths and challenges. Now, like all studies, this one has its limits. It relies on self-report measures, meaning people are telling us about their own experiences, which can sometimes be biased. They also only used one questionnaire for visual imagery. And importantly, all the participants were military veterans, so we can't automatically say these findings apply exactly to civilians. The study is also cross-sectional, meaning it is a snapshot in time. It shows a link between imagery and PTSD, but it can't definitively say if low imagery causes PTSD or if having PTSD leads people to avoid or suppress their imagery. Future research could really dig deeper using different questionnaires that can distinguish between different types of imagery, like object versus spatial imagery, could be really insightful. It would also be great to see if pre-deployment imagery ability can predict who develops PTSD afterwards. And of course, testing whether tailoring treatments based on imagery ability actually leads to better outcomes would be a crucial next step. So, to wrap it up, this study offers a fascinating twist on our understanding of visual imagery and PTSD. It suggests that instead of vivid imagery being solely a risk factor, it might actually be a tool that can help process trauma, especially in dealing with negative beliefs about oneself and the world. And for those with aphantasia, while they might not have visual flashbacks, this doesn't mean they are immune to the devastating effects of PTSD. It highlights the need for personalized treatment approaches that consider an individual's unique cognitive strengths and challenges. It is a reminder that our minds work in incredibly diverse ways, and understanding those differences can help us heal. What do you think about these findings? Does this resonate with your own experiences with mental imagery and stress? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more breakdowns of fascinating research, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.